cold starts. So what happens inside an engine when it's started from cold? Well, you have to think about several things. For one, how cold is it? Because the damage what can be caused from doing starting an engine from the cold incorrectly can be catastrophic. You can spin bearings, wear out pistons, wear out valves, stem seals, piston rings, bores. Yeah, there's pretty much every moving part inside the engine that can be damaged and worn out prematurely from starting an engine the wrong way in the cold. Yeah, the right way to do it is to start it up and leave it on tick over. If you have a carburetor, try and get it to idle as low as possible, but with a fuel injection car or a diesel, you're not going to be able to get the idle any lower than what it's supposed to be, which is probably about 800 RPM. But the lower the revs the better for the warm-up, because when you start up an engine from the cold, everything is stiff. Everything, in some cases, some engines don't have very good sort of oil ways, so all the oil will drain down to the bottom of the engine in the sump quickly. So the pump's going to have to pump it up to the top again, to the rockers and the valves and everything like that, and then to get around to the top of the pistons. So you have to think, is it really cold outside? If it's really cold, like let's say 0 degrees or below Celsius, then the oil can be quite thick. The viscosity of the oil can be quite thick, in which case the pump's going to have to pump it up to around the engine, but it's not going to be able to do it as efficiently as it would do if the oil was thin or if it was hot. So what you think about is what is the temperature outside, and never rev your engine when it is cold. It doesn't matter, even in the summer's day, just give it at least 30 seconds to warm up, even on a hot summer's day, because the metal in there is not going to be hot. It's still going to be quite cold. It'll be about -30 or so. I would say about -20 to -30 degrees Celsius before the oil inside your engine will become quite thick. But you also have to think about the gearbox oil, because if I don't know what kind of winters you lot have, depending where you live. If you're living in a country where you get a very cold winter, like Russia, I think Canada, and America, some parts in America, Alaska, wherever you might be that gets a very cold winter, the oil is going to be quite tough, it's quite stiff. So if you get in your car, if you've got a manual, you'll notice this particularly. If you get in your car or truck or wherever you've got, and you wiggle the gear stick in neutral, left to right, if it's cold enough, the oil will be so stiff that when you move the gear stick to the right or to the left, it won't ping back. Or if it does ping back, it'll ping back very slowly. That's because the oil is very, it's starting to solidify because it's so cold. So you have to think about that, because your engine oil will be the same. And also, once you get your car started, eventually, whether it takes a long while or whether it starts up straight away is a different matter. You should let your engine warm up, because that will also put heat, dissipate it and transfer it into the gearbox to get your gearbox oil warm. Because think about it as well, if your gearbox oil is stiff and you just drive straight away, then gears and cogs are going to be turning, but the oil is not going to be going around with them, and it's not going to be going in the little nooks and crannies and lubricating the bearings as it should do, because it's thick. So you want to get it hot so that it can get thin again, to run in all the little bits that it needs to run into, and to go around and to lubricate everything it's supposed to be lubricating. I see it very often, especially in the winter here in the UK, because everyone is stupid when it comes to cars, or the minority of people anyway, especially people that just get in their car to go to work. You see people start up their cars, big clouds of steam behind them, and they just shoot off down the road. The big cloud of steam behind them, and you can hear the pain that engine is going through. It is painful. You even see people driving down, I live quite near an A road, 70 mile an hour A road. So you don't even have to, by the time you get on, I let my engines warm up all the time, but usually by the time I've got down to there, the engine's not hot enough to be able to put any heat out on the heater. So if you start your car straight up and then just drive off and go on that road, you'll get there and your engine will still be pretty much stone cold. The main parts will still be hot, but you know, the crank and everything won't be at the working temperature. And you see people shooting down there with clouds of steam behind them, you know, and you can smell the smell of just a cold engine. And it's very, very bad. If you've got a carbureted engine, or if you're just talking about back in the old days when everything had carburetors, and obviously apart from diesels, but every petrol engine had a carburetor, they wouldn't start up. They'd start up, but they would not rev because the fuel air mixture wasn't set for that. It was set for the running temperature. So you wouldn't rev it, so people were forced to warm their engines up. So, you know, probably most engines from back then were in better condition than the modern day ones, because the modern day ones, the ECUs and computers are all set up to adjust. So it senses it's cold, it goes, oh, I'll add a bit more fuel, a little bit more air maybe, and then we'll get this engine running so this person can just rev it up and destroy the engine. So there's so many different factors of, you know, what sort of damage can be caused by starting an engine from cold and not treating it properly and just revving it up straight away. Most of the wear in an engine occurs from a cold start. You know, so if you're in a cold country and it's cold all the time, or you have very cold winters, more than likely those engines are going to be worse condition internally than the ones that are in a hot country, or the ones that are in a warm country like the UK. But you know, like I said, everyone in the UK is stupid when it comes to starting looking after their cars in the winter. They don't realise the importance of a warm-up period. You only need maybe 5 minutes in extreme cold just to get some heat in the engine so that it's safe to drive, and you save yourself a lot of money. Think about it as well, because you know, how would you feel if you bought a second-hand car and it seemed alright at the time, but a month down the line your piston rings go, or a bearing spins or something goes, you know, start chucking out a bit of smoke for some reason, and it turns out everything's worn inside, you know, because the last person maybe didn't change their oil enough and they started it up from cold every time and revved the hell out of it when they drove down the road. So if you was to sell your car and you treat it like that, you wouldn't like it if you bought a car like that, would you? So basically, look after your engine in the cold weather. A lot of damage can be done. You've also got to think of fuel. Mainly diesels. Diesels can get something what's, you know, just engine knocking. All that is when there's not enough fuel in the engine. There's a bit too much air and not quite enough diesel going in. That can happen you hear that mainly in the winter when the engines are really cold. And sometimes you get this loud knocking sound where the diesel going in is so cold it's not combusting completely, and you get like a really loud knocking sound when the engine's running until it warms up, and then that knocking sound will go. And that's just because there's so much fuel going into the cylinders in the combustion chamber, but it is so cold that it can't combust properly, and diesel needs a bit of heat along with a lot of compression in order to ignite. Diesel just won't ignite from a spark, for example, or some fire. It needs heat and compression. And now it's got the compression there, but it ain't got the heat it needs. That's why diesels sometimes take a long while to start in the extreme cold, but also they get a loud knocking noise. Did I mention you can spin bearings as well? Because the bearings are so cold, they can be so cold, so that when the crank, for example, say we're going to spin the crank bearing, that's cold. Yeah, imagine when you're cold, you're really cold, you're all stiff, aren't you? Your skin's stiff, your muscles might be stiff. So when that crank started up and it's spinning really quick, really like suddenly, that bearing, it's because it's stiff and the oil is stiff, and you know, it can be spun around where the crank spins and the bearing spins, but it comes out of where it's supposed to be. It gets dislodged. That's called a spun bearing. Now your bearing isn't doing its job in that case. It might start to knock, wear out, anything could happen, it will fail completely. because usually it will be seated in a specific place, and the crank will be going round, and the bearing will be a bearing. It will be doing its job. But if it spins and it gets put in a different position where it ain't meant to be, that's a bad thing. Think of a cold engine like, imagine you were laying in bed, right? You're laying in bed now. It's cold. It's very cold outside. Whatever temperature you want it to be. Say it's 0 degrees, right? You're laying in bed in your boxers or in your knickers or nightie or wherever you're male or female, whatever you decide to wear. And all of a sudden someone comes in with a loud horn or a saucepan with a spoon or whatever, making a load of noise. Get up, come on. And you have to go, and you're full straight away. You have to run, do a sprint. You have to literally get up and sprint straight away, yeah? No warming up, no nothing. You're still half asleep. You're like, what's going on, you know? And you've got to go and do a sprint. Now, your muscles in your body ain't going to thank you. You might even pull a muscle. You might rip a muscle. You might do some damage, right? That's the equivalent of a spun bearing or some damage, yeah? So just think of it that way. That's the way I think of it, anyway. You know? An engine is a lot like a human. You don't like being woken up and forced to go on a sprint straight away from when it's cold outside, you're freezing, you've got no clothes on, yeah, because an engine ain't got any clothes on. And it's freezing cold, your muscles are all going to be stiff, you might be in some pain. And if you're unlucky enough, you'll pull a muscle or rip a muscle or do some other damage. Same with a car. It might be alright first few times, but it might be one time you start up your car and rev it or drive down the road quickly, you spin a bearing, you do some damage to a piston ring or do some damage to something, or your oil might be so thick because it's cold that it don't get up to the top of your engine somewhere, and your camshaft wears out, your little cams wear out over time. So just think of it like that, my friends. So I hope that's put a new thought process into your head about starting up your engine cold next time you think about starting it up and driving off straight away.